Welcome to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio, bringing you insights and strategies to help you create a magnificent and fulfilling second half of life. Here's your host, certified professional retirement coach and best-selling author, Dr. Dorian Mintzer.
I want to welcome everybody to my fourth Tuesday Revolutionize Your Retirement Interview with Expert series. I'm Dorian Mintzer, owner of Revolutionize Retirement, and I'm also your host for this call-in series. I'm delighted to again introduce Richard. He was part of my series earlier this year, and he agreed to return once his new book was out. And he was just saying that he's had so many media requests, and it's already been into a second reprint. And I do want to say it's a wonderful book. It's so interesting. It's both very easy to read. It's so simple, but it's so provocative. At least that's my sense of it. And I think it's the kind of book that's good to read once and then go back and read each chapter and work with each chapter. That's at least my sense of it. So let me introduce Richard, and then we'll get going. Richard Leider, who many of you maybe have heard speak other times before or written or read many of his books. This is his 11th book. He's internationally best-selling author and coach, founder of Inventor, the Purpose Company, where the mission is to help people to unlock the power of purpose and answer that question. He's ranked by Forbes as one of the top 5 most respected coaches. Along the way, Richard's written, as I said, 11 books, including 3 bestsellers, which have sold over 1 million copies. The Power of Purpose and Repacking Your Bags are considered classics in the personal growth field. And his latest book, Who Do You Want to Be When You Grow Old, is a defining book on the power and purpose of aging. Richard's widely viewed as a pioneer of the global purpose movement. His work has been featured in many media sources, and his PBS special, The Power of Purpose, was viewed by millions of people. He's taken the purpose message to all 50 states, Canada, and 4 continents, and he's advised everyone from ARP to the National Football League to the U.S. State Department. During his career, he's addressed more than 2 million people worldwide in his speeches to corporate, association, and social service groups. He and his wife, Sally, live in the Minneapolis, Minnesota area. Richard, I am delighted you're here again, and I was mentioning before we started that I actually heard you speak last week at the Retirement Coaches Association, and I'm just delighted to have you back to talk about your new book. Welcome, and why don't you start by just telling us what motivated you to write yet this other book about aging, and maybe mention a little about how it's being received.
This is my 6th book with David Shapiro, who is a tenured philosophy professor in Seattle. And we were having a conversation. In fact, the first chapter of the book is called The Long Conversation. But over the 6 books, we've had a continuing conversation that includes our own lives as well as the research and study we do on other lives. And we found ourselves aging and said, we're living 3 decades longer. There was a book 47 years ago which stopped at midlife called Passages. And Passages is on the New York Times bestseller list for years because it offered a new narrative for midlife and life in the middle. And we said, what's the new narrative for the big shift from adulthood to elderhood? We grow up twice, Doris. Once is from childhood to adulthood, and the second time is from adulthood to elderhood. So we decided to write that new narrative like Passages did, with a new language and new possibilities of purposeful aging. So that was the genesis, but we talk all the time and back and forth. And so the first chapter is the long conversation, and the last chapter is the ultimate conversation. Mm-hmm. And in between, there are 9 chapters which are questions. And so that's the backstory of the book. And it was a lot of fun to do because basically we're writing about a time in life that we're both in as well.
And I think you had mentioned that what you're discovering, too, is that there's been such an uptick in interest in aging during the pandemic because you're already into your what was it, second or third reprint?
It's the first reprint, but there's going to be another. It looks like. It came out on July 13th in audio, Kindle, and print, and that's unusual as well.
It's wonderful, and as I said before, I think it's a wonderful book. That it has tools, insights, questions, exercises. It's just so helpful on so many levels. Why don't we start, even though I know you talked last time about what is purpose, but it probably for those maybe new to the call or who haven't read your book, tell us what to you purpose is and what's the secret of finding your purpose, living your purposeful aging. I'll combine it together in the question.
Yeah. I would thank you for having me back again, but I would remind us that purpose is not a luxury. It's not something for a particular demographic group or affluent or educated type of personality. It is fundamental. It's both universal and fundamental, and it's fundamental to health, healing, happiness, and ultimately longevity. And now the evidence is there. In my third edition of The Power of Purpose book, which came out with my PBS special, the chapter that PBS really wanted me to write, which I added to the book, was Can Science Explain Purpose? And now it can. Now purpose has become self-evident in terms of well-being and longevity and things like that. So purpose is not a goal, it's an aim. It's an aim about a direction that you want to live your life. And in the book, we say it's a path and a practice. It's a path or a mindset, and that mindset is about doing things in life that are meaningful to you and matter and make a difference to others in some positive way. And purpose is a choice that we make when we get up every day. Why am I here? What am I here to do? And what am I going to do today to make a difference in the world in some way? So there's a lot of ways to cut it, but ultimately it gets down to me to two words: grow and give. And that's purpose. The universal purpose after almost now 5 decades of study is to grow and give. And if you get up every day with the intention to grow and give, you're then living purposefully. It's not about Dory as having a purpose, because that's
right.
A purpose is a verb. It's an action. It's living purposefully and making choices daily.
So how does one go about doing that? Can you offer, I know you talk about it in the book, but my hunch is that some of the listeners may be interested in how to go about living one's purpose and discovering, letting it reveal itself to you, I think, because I think, as you say, it's not necessarily finding it, but sometimes it's just going inward so that you can discover it.
Yeah. First of all, I talk about purpose with a big P and purpose with a little p. And purpose with a big P often is something that, it's like a noble. I have to have a cause. I have to do something that really is impressive to myself and others. And I have to quit my day job and volunteer somewhere to do something. That's okay, and that's one way to look at it. But purpose with a small p is what I was mentioning a minute ago, and that's those daily choices. There are 1,440 purpose moments in a day. And those are the daily choices we make to make a difference in the world. So 2 ways to do that. And number one is, first of all, you have to answer the question, do I have a purpose? And if you have a pulse, you have a purpose. You have a reason for being here. You might not have named it yet, but you do have a reason. And I believe, and you're here for that reason. Purpose with a small p is number one is to do the 2-minute purpose practice first thing every morning. And the 2-minute practice has 3 steps. Number 1, pause. Number 2, take 3 deep breaths. Number 3, set an intention about one person's life you're going to make a difference in today, or one situation in which you're going to make a difference today. And making a difference means simply a kind word, a hug, a phone call. It's nanoseconds or micro things that we do, not big things. And every morning I do that. And I try to then activate that during the course of the day. Secondly is to put grow and give on a Post-it. Put that Post-it on your mirror, and tomorrow morning, ask yourself, how am I going to grow and give today? And at the end of the day, before you go to sleep at night, hold yourself accountable, personal accountability. How did I grow and give today? What was I curious about? What did I learn today? And whose life or what situation did I impact? After you do that Post-it exercise for a week or so, you'll have a felt sense of what purpose really is. Not a concept, but an experience of it. And you'll find, usually, there are exceptions, that it feels really good. I feel more engaged. I feel more alive when I start to look for and reach out beyond myself. One of my colleagues, when you call his phone, and if he's not there, the voice message says, at the sound of the tone, please leave your answer to life's two eternal questions. Who are you and what do you want? And when you look at those, who are you and what do you want, I find there's two things that people really want. And number one is to belong, to feel like they fit into community, society, family, and to matter. No exceptions. People want to belong and they want to matter. And to matter means to activate things, not just have an intention that you don't act on. So those are a couple ways to do that. And you can also look for exemplars of purpose. Who are the people you really admire that are living what I would call purposeful lives, who you feel like they are belonging and mattering in certain ways, and talk to them, and or at least think about what they do that's possible that you could do.
Do you think anyone ever gets too old to work on the growing and giving and the belonging and mattering?
Never. It's a great question, and that's why we wrote this book, because in 1900, the average life expectancy in many developed countries, the U.S. in particular, was age 47. Now we've added, when you talk about revolutionizing retirement, we've added 3 to 4 decades to life, and the fastest growing cohort is 85 and over. And in 10 years, we're going to have 10 times more centenarians than we have now, people who live to be 100. What's the purpose? Does greater longevity have a purpose? Is it just to go to Sun City and relax and do things? I don't think so. I think people want to belong and matter from cradle to grave. And at different times in life, we might make different decisions based on that and based on circumstances. And so people often will say not only about aging, Dory, but they'll say, yeah, but what about the fact that I've got this adversity, this disease, or this thing? And one of the stories in the book is about a man named Ed Rapp. Mm-hmm. Ed was one of 3 presidents of Caterpillar, the big earth-moving yellow machines out there company worldwide. He grew up in a very small town, big family, farm life in Missouri, first of his family to go to the university, graduated, went to work, grew into this role. And at age 57, he was out running with his son and his foot was dragging. And he couldn't figure out. He thought it was just being tired from global travel, et cetera. Make a long story clear, he was diagnosed at the Mayo Clinic with ALS. And here he is at 57. I don't know if people think that's old or midlife or whatever, but let's just say 57. And he had to immediately resign or retire. And he moved back to Raleigh, North Carolina, where he had a home. And he's done 2 things. And I wrote the story about him publicly, and I know him, and I've worked with him on leadership and coaching and other things. And the big P of purpose, he created a foundation which has so far raised $15 million for ALS research. And he's become a spokesperson for ALS research. He walks now with arm crutches. He has to do a lot of different breathing exercises and other things that ALS is a 5 to 7 year sentence. And he's in 6.5 years into it now, and he's doing okay. And the second little P thing he does, Dory, is every single morning he wakes up, Now, this is the intention I'm talking about and the activation of purpose, little p. Every morning, he fields a telephone call from somebody who he's never met and will never see that was just diagnosed with ALS and is terrified and wants to talk to somebody about their fears and their trepidations at this point. And he finds this to be the good life in certain ways. He says, Richard, I feel so alive when I do this. And I feel physically better when I do this, as well as I know I'm not going to live to see the $15 million of research that might help ALS or even cure it. But what I'm doing matters. And I'm part of a larger community. So to belong and to matter. So that's an example. And I could give many examples of people who choose a different way in spite of their adversity.
It's a wonderful example. I remember being impressed as I was reading about him in the book. So I think one of the chapters that you have too, but one of the themes of your book is shifting from living life by default to really designing your life. Can you talk about that and maybe ways to do it? And I think the example of Ed Rabb is part of it, of some of the choices you make. So maybe you can expand on that.
Yeah. Spoiler alert. You're getting older. You're getting older. Aging isn't optional, but growing is. So in this book, what we talk about is the distinction between get old or grow old. You choose. And growing old requires that we sometimes make a shift in our lives from a default life. And I'm not saying everybody lives a default life, but a default life, one of the chapters, in fact, the chapter that gets the most attention often is how do I stop living a default life? And a default life is one that you have accepted but not really robustly chosen. And it might be that it was because of economics or where you lived or how you were educated that you just started down a path of work. So many people who I've coached over the years have said, Richard, my work, my career, I didn't really choose it. It chose me. I didn't know what to do. So I just started. Someone said, and maybe it was a parent or some influencer said, oh, Richard, you'd really be good at math. You should go down the math path. That's not me at all, for example. And the person did, or you should go to law school. And then they end up in midlife saying, no, I don't like law. But how do I stop living a default life that I actually didn't choose and start living a life, if I'm going to live 3 decades longer, potentially, hopefully, how do I make a shift to the good life or a new vision of a good life for myself? So the starting point is self-awareness, which leads to self-development or choice, which ultimately leads to self-gift, or in some ways giving and connecting to the world, which is the purpose part of it that we've talked about. So this, how do I outgrow adulthood and into elderhood? And so as we know, aging is not a disease. It's a design challenge. And the old design was learn, earn, retire. That 3-box scenario narrative is dead. For most people, it's still, or some people, it's still alive, but for most people, it's not. They realize that it's not, and it's partially that you talk about revolutionizing retirement, a lot more about this than I potentially do, but I've talked to so many people who say, I don't really want to retire, but I want to reframe what I'm doing. And I want to continue to work, or I want to do this, or I want to do that. And it's not just the old model of, my dad, for example, worked for the same organization, earned his way into a management position, retired after 40 years, and died 2 years later. And I see a lot of people who die emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, not necessarily physically, because they've lost their sense of, why am I doing this? What do I need to do? And who are my relationships with now other than just my family? And the time structure, they find themselves bored and on. The default life, the next chapter is, how do I start living, or how do I live the good life my whole life?
So can you elaborate a little more on that? Because I do think it's so important. The curiosity, the reason to get up in the morning. I think you talk about making appointments with oneself to be able to.
First of all, I think that there are practices, but the first thing is self-awareness. Constitutes at this stage a good life for me. And chronological age is futile. It's subjective age. Our time horizon, we make the distinction in the book between the rearview mirror and the windshield. And the rearview mirror is small, and it's important to do a life review or to look at lessons learned and to honor what we've done. But the windshield, looking forward at the next decades or the next year or the next day, the windshield's way bigger than the rearview mirror. So subjective age is when you have a shorter time horizon often, the rearview mirror is bigger in some ways in terms of length of time. And we start to not panic, but we start to make choices that have a greater sense of urgency. So the good life, we wrote a book called Repacking Your Bags, Lighten Your Load for the Good Life, which has sold over 1 million copies in 21 languages. And it defines, like we redefine it in this book, or we review it in this book, as the living in the place you love, with the people you love, doing the work you love on purpose. And that, so place is important, and oftentimes as we look at retirement or second half of life, it's all about place and weather and all of that. But then we get to that place, and then we have to look inside ourselves and look at our relationships to say, I don't know, who are the people that I hang out with? Who are the people who I can talk to who get me and who I can really be close to? And where I studied with the Harvard Study of Adult Development, which is where Gail Sheehy got her data for the book Passages, by the way back when, the late Gail Sheehy. And so that study shows that purpose and relationships are fundamental to a progressively positive long life. And the Harvard Study of Adult Development is the longest study of adults, 80 plus years out there today. So people and relationships, part of the good life. Then when we get to right work, that could be avocational work. It could be spiritual work. It doesn't have to be job, career, paid. It's what you do all day, every day with your time, in addition to your leisure. And then finally, on purpose, with a sense of purpose. I would ask your listeners, are you living in the place you love, with the people you love, doing the work you love as defined by I just did, and with a sense of purpose, with a why, with a reason to get up every morning, feeling like you want to get up and you want to get at it. And I think I always acknowledge one of my exemplars, a person who I studied with and had a week, I didn't study with, but I had a week studying with, Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, who I think in many ways is the godfather of purpose in some ways. And he and his whole family and his extended family were taken by the Nazis from Vienna, where he was training medical residents, doctors, in what he called logotherapy or meaning therapy. And he basically came back. His family was killed, all of them, including his pregnant wife, Tilly. He went back to Vienna and he healed after being liberated at 87 pounds from Auschwitz. And after he healed, he gave some lectures and talks. He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, which has become a classic globally. Has sold millions and millions of copies. He had 30 honorary doctorates from around the world, and he died about 13 years ago at the age of 93. But he said the last of the human freedoms, Dory, is choice. It's to choose what you want, like Ed Rapp, to choose what you want the moment to be about. Said so he could get up in the morning and with a will to live, first of all, and then give somebody else in the concentration camp a kind word, a hug, a crust of bread, hope for the future in certain ways. And that sense of choice, he said, is available to us throughout our lives from cradle to grave, in spite of the adversities. He says, say yes to life. in spite of it all. And he said, don't ask, what is my purpose in life? Ask this, what is life asking of me today? What is life asking of me right now? And that was so powerful for me. It changed my life. Even though I had advanced degrees in counseling psychology, all of a sudden I said, this is what I want to help. This is what I want to do, and this is what I want to help other people do.
Yeah, his work is just profound and important. And you mentioned, I'm jumping ahead and I'll go back to some other questions I have, but since we're talking about Viktor Frankl, you mentioned the term tragic optimism in the book, and I really was taken by that also. So can you talk about that? Because it's just related. I'll let you talk about it.
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant term. Sometimes we're pushed by pain, and sometimes we're pulled by possibility. And when we're pushed by pain, it's like coming out of this pandemic. There's something called post-traumatic growth. Some people choose to grow as a result of coming out of this. They've pushed the pause button, they've stepped back, and they've looked at, they're making certain decisions. So if you look at the pandemic and post-traumatic stress and growth as a bell-shaped curve, the left-hand side, lower 15%. 15% people coming out of this are feeling hopeless, despair, maybe even depressed. The middle percent, let's say, are feeling mildly hopeful, but don't have practices that are really, they're just hoping things will change and things will get better, and eventually they'll bounce back. They'll be resilient. And the right hand is post-traumatic growth, where people have a tragic optimism mindset, that there's some reasons that coming out of this that have improved my life, not taken away everything. And tragic optimism is Viktor Frankl's word for that mindset. And when we talk about unlocking the power of purpose, as opposed to finding purpose or discovering it, it's unlocking. Dory, it's unlocking that mindset, that tragic optimism type mindset that, yes, I can get through this. And yes, I can help somebody else get through this. And everybody's an experiment of one. But isolation is fatal. Going it alone is not a good idea. We're herd animals. We're part of a community. And his helping others, Ed Rapp helping others, and many other stories in the book bring more optimism and more energetic health to life as opposed to not.
Which is so important. And you also talk about not being so afraid of recognizing death as a reality of life, and that actually can lead to a more meaningful life. Maybe you can expand on that too.
First of all, the chapter that, going back to Ed Rapp for a minute, the chapter in the book that we took from him is called Will I Earn a Passing Grade in Life? Will I earn a passing grade? And that's what he said. He said, Richard, I just want to earn a passing grade. And he's very humble in spite of his success and what he's done and raising millions and millions of dollars and things. I just want to earn a passing grade. He's got a very strong faith, and that he judges that by. But as I said, the first chapter in this book is the long life, or the long conversation. And then the last chapter is the ultimate conversation, where we have it with each other, David and I. And we said the ultimate conversation is really about death and dying. And so often people might think that's morbid. But to us and to many readers that we found, it's liberated them to actually think about three questions. And we answer those three questions in the book ourselves in short order. What do you think happens when you die? How would you like to die? And what gifts do you want to leave the world before you die? And several people in the book said that what really helped them to make wise decisions as they're growing older is to keep death daily before their eyes. Keep death daily before their eyes to say, look, you're penciled in here for a short time. Better make some choices. Better understand what it is you want to, what legacy you're leaving. And we found that this has been an inspiring read for people, that part, as opposed to a downer.
Yeah. No, it is so liberating to be able to recognize there's that urgency that we have, and death provides it, and wanting to live well. And as you say, get a passing grade in life.
I was just going to add one element to this.
Please.
And in my coaching, I've always advised people to create their own celebration of life. You could say their epitaph, but I don't quite like that one. And so this weekend, my wife and I were having a discussion, and I went into my office alone and revised my celebration of life, how I want it to end and how I want it to be, I'll call, celebrated. And I'm asked at times, and just 2 weeks ago, I was the officiant at a celebration of life for a neighbor who died at the age of 77, which is my age, by the way. And I found that, like David Brooks writes, that there's a distinction between resume virtues and eulogy virtues. And if you go to a memorial service or a celebration of life or a funeral, you'll note that the resume virtues are very short and quick. And right away, what really is engaging are what David Brooks calls the eulogy virtues, which are, who was this? And what gifts did they leave the world and me, so to speak, or whomever is asking the question. So I advise people to do that, and I find that also to be liberating, to write your own celebration of life.
Yeah, no, I think so. It definitely is. So I'm going to go back to another chapter in your life that I really resonated with too, because it's interesting. I often have said to people, I don't believe there's a midlife crisis. It's more shifting that happens, but I think for some people there is. But you talk about a late life crisis. So can you elaborate on that and what you mean by that and how people can identify it?
There is a quiz in the book, 10 questions called Am I Having a Late Life Crisis? And it's a whole chapter, Am I Having a Late Life Crisis? And so often people will say, oh, I'm having a midlife crisis, and they're 70 or they're 65 and I said, what is a midlife crisis? And when I hear what what is this you're talking about, it's not really an achievement gap or something that the midlife crisis was about. It's really an existential crisis about how they want to live out the next phase of their life. We ask them questions. We ask them in the book to have a conversation with somebody using this quiz. And by the way, there's quite a bit of research on, it's not always called a late life crisis, but about 1 out of 3 people having some sort of late life crisis that they're feeling that existential gap. And do you often find yourself looking in the mirror and thinking, who is this person? Or do you feel reluctant to tell people your age, you're anti-aging versus pro-actively aging? And do you obsess about your appearance, trying to anti-age, to look younger? And do you compare yourself to others your age and worry that you're not measuring up? And so those are a few of the types of questions that when you start to look at them, the book is actually pro-aging, not anti-aging. We're not trying to be 50 or 40. We're trying to be a full, robust 70 or whatever age, and what can that authentically look like for you? And having that conversation and having a sounding board or a committed listener to have that conversation with, we think is really important for not everybody, but for many people to have.
And it's a wonderful chapter. And on page 77, for those of you who are going to have his book, is the list of it all. But you also talk about the transition to becoming an elder, a wise elder saging, which I really love the saging group that I'm a member of. Yeah. And maybe just elaborate a little on that too, because it's constantly redefining ourselves and becoming, as you say in another chapter, more whole. And all of that is embracing growing older.
Yeah, we talk about growing whole, not old. And Chip Connolly, who created the Modern Elder Academy, which I'm a faculty of, there's a chapter in the book. His book is really a brilliant book on aging, and it's called Wisdom at Work. But he talks about the great midlife edit, and where we start to decide what is it we want to let or need to let go of, and what do we want to embrace. So he talks about that. And then Parker Palmer, who many of your listeners might have heard of or know about, he talked about 80. He did a clearness committee. And a clearness committee is a Quaker concept, but it could be used by anybody, faith or not. And a clearness committee can only ask questions. So if you invited some people to sit down with you, what would be the questions that you would want help with? And then they can only ask questions. They can't give advice. So his questions to his clearness committee were, at age 80, what do I need to let go of? And what do I need to hang on to? And all of a sudden, through the questions that he was asked, Dory, he got a breakthrough. He said, what do I need to hang on to and what I need to let go of? That's a scarcity model. He said, the real question is, what do I need to give my gifts to? What do I need to give to at this stage in life? And he goes on to say something which your readers might find perplexing, but I find very provocative. He said, I can't imagine living without a vocation. And so vocation is different than job, different than career. Vocare means to be called. So he says, I can't imagine living without a calling to give my gifts to others, is basically what he's saying here. And David and I define calling as the inner urge, that inner, mysterious inner urge to give our gifts that makes us human and makes it in so many ways. So that shift from, you speak of, from adulthood to elderhood is about that kind of thing. What do I need to hang on to? What do I need to let go of? What do I need to give to? However you define it, what are your questions? But it's really about the wisdom of, to me, wisdom is seeing the big picture and knowing what weight to give things. And so personally, seeing the big picture in one's own life and knowing what to prioritize. And one of the things that I am very big on is the word no. No is a complete sentence. So we need to be able to feel permission to say no, not in a toxic, mean-spirited way, but no meaning no. The answer is no, I'm not going to be there. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to take this off my calendar. I'm not going to meet with this person. Otherwise, if we don't do that, we find ourselves postponing life until it's too late. And learning to say no with a clear sense of prioritization and compassion is very important to becoming a wise elder, I believe.
Oh, I think that's an excellent point, because if you can't say no, you don't have any space to say yes to anything. And
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
You also talk about growing whole as sort of integrity and integration. Can you just speak to that? And then after that one, I'm going to start bringing in the questions from other people.
Yeah. Growing whole means that earlier in life, usually we're busy doing things, whether it's a default life or just a busy life. When I ask people how things are going, they say, oh, busy. And then they'll name all the things that they're busy about that day and that week and that month and et cetera. And at a certain point, often the pandemic, like a crisis, like when we're pushed by pain, we push the pause button and we ask ourselves, what was I not paying attention to here? And oftentimes that comes with retirement. When we're pulled by possibilities, we look at what really becomes, and we realize that we haven't attended to relationships. We haven't attended to spiritual growth. We haven't attended to health. We haven't attended to. So growing whole means completing ourselves in certain ways by looking at parts of our life that are unattended to, that we might want to attend to. And I know that I'm a senior fellow at 2 universities, and it's all about integrative health and integrative well-being. And when you look at integrative health, whether it's at the Mayo Clinic or the Cleveland Clinic or Duke or these universities, you look at whole being, there's a lot of aspects to being other than nutrition, diet, and exercise and sleep. There's a lot of other aspects that we also attitudinally might need to pay attention to. And so growing whole is really about that. So we try to helped people to define that in this book in certain ways. And the title of the book riffs on something that I'm sure your listeners were asked at some point in their life. What do you want to be when you grow up? And some people, like in midlife or later, will joke about it, like the midlife crisis. They'll say, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. But we changed that to who, not what. Who do you want to, the first title was what do you want to do when you grow up? The title we use is who, not what, do you want to be when you grow old? And we particularly use the term old to honor old aging as opposed to deny it. And so we argued with the publisher. They didn't want to use the word old because they said old doesn't sell books. We found that the opposite is true today, that with the demographics of society, that old does not only sells books, it becomes a bestseller. Right. But the point is not to be a bestseller, but the point was, what is the path of purposeful aging? What do I actually do to grow whole? And so we talked about some of those things here already.
And as I said, it's a wonderful book. I recommend it to people. A question from Alan in Florida. First, I do want to say a number of people have asked. There will be a recording sent to you later today. So you will have a recording, so you'll be able to re-listen. And Richard will have the recording to be able to use on his website or anywhere he would like to use it too. But sure. Alan asks, one of the obstacles to your idea of growing and giving is ageism. How would you address this?
Alan, with great difficulty. It's an uphill battle all the way, whether it's in the work world or whatever. But the question that's often asked, so what do you do? And that's a dangerous question, because what if you're retired? And the old adage, if you are what you do, when you don't, you aren't. And so I would flip that question instead of what do you do? Here's what I'm passionate about. What are you passionate about? And other people will say in the ageist world, in the world of ageist confrontations or et cetera, they'll say, oh, Richard, you look so good. And I turn around, and this could be someone who's 40, and say, so do you. And so it's owning your own things in certain ways. And the one ageist word that I talk with all the time with Dr. Bill Thomas, the preeminent geriatrician, who I work with every week. And he's in the book. There's a story about him in the book. He created the Eden Alternative, and his TED Talk on ageism is one of the most viewed talks of all time. And the word is still. Alan, you're still jogging. Alan, you're still writing. Alan, you're still working. Who gets to decide the still rule? Because here I am, 77, and I'm doing a podcast with Dory. Oh, you're still writing. Oh, you're still, not only that, I'm loving it more than ever. And I'm more active in a lot of things that I hypothetically in the ageist world should not be doing. I should be living a life of leisure. A life of leisure, I have plenty of leisure, but it's boring to me because I am so engaged with what we're talking about here and the study I'm doing on positive aging, purposeful aging. Anyway, I hope that helps.
I think that's a great response. And I think it relates to, there's a question from Glenn, who's from North Carolina, and he says, possibly a silly question, have you any guidelines on which bucket list items to try versus those which are best left undone? In other words, realistically recognizing your limits on time, effort, money, and more importantly, physical stamina and ability required. I was watching some kite surfers enviously the other day, but as I approached 70, I found myself wondering whether to adjust my sights and expectations on that one. Any comments to that?
As I said earlier, everyone is an experiment of one, so you have to, there's no advice here, but Alan Weber, who's now the mayor seeking a second term of Santa Fe, New Mexico, he used to be the editor of the Harvard Business Review, and then he founded Fast Company magazine, and then the two of us started to do work together, and we wrote a book called Life Reimagined. And there are 6 steps in the book Life Reimagined, and they are these: reflect, connect, explore, choose, repack, and act. And I would say when you think about your bucket list, first of all, reflect what's on the list. Secondly, connect. Have a committed listener or sounding board or even clearness committee on what you're thinking about. Third, explore. This is the big one. Get out there and try it. Get out there and talk to somebody who's doing it or done it. Find an exemplar who's older and doing it and ask if you could apprentice or so just try it. You don't have to go in the water and get aboard and do anything dangerous, but just explore, open doors. And I'll tell you that, Glenn, the drain of indecision is really a bad thing. Just living in the drain. Explore, get out, and then choose. Make a decision. Yeah, I'm going to try this. Or, no, I'm not going to try this, but I'll try that. So choose. And then repack means what do you need to let go of in order to have either the money, the time, or maybe you need to work out and get more fit in order to do something like that. And then act. Take one small baby step forward to really, and so have a mental model, have a process, a practice, rather than just live with the drain of indecision.
Great. That's a wonderful response. Renee from New York has a comment and also a question. So she says, never too old to matter. Age is just a number. We belong and matter as long as we're breathing. The challenge is to discover what makes you happy and continually assess what makes you happy using the first two principles of EQ, self-awareness and self-regulation. And then she goes on to ask or say, love that people are choosing to grow in the pandemic. And she's curious and wonders if you have any idea what percentage of people are now in post-traumatic growth phase.
I don't know how to measure that, but I find generally what I hear from the medical community and the psychiatric community is about 20% are in the post-traumatic growth. But there are researchers at the University of North Carolina called Calhoun and Tedeschi who have studied post-traumatic growth and actually have a post-traumatic growth inventory, and that data is being updated all the time. So you could go to I don't actually know what their website is, but if you go to my website, richardleider.com, there is that post-traumatic growth inventory there to take a look at the kinds of learnings that define post-traumatic growth through their research.
Great, thank you. So Alan from Florida also asks, how do you respond to older people who say they cannot afford to change?
I'd say curiosity and exploration doesn't cost anything. When Alan and I wrote Life Reimagined, the first chapter in that book was, this isn't what I was expecting. At this age, I wasn't expecting to be broke. I wasn't expecting my kids to live with me. I wasn't expecting to be working or dating online or on and on. Then the next chapter was get real. I don't have the money or I don't have the, and what we answered is to explore that model that I talked about doesn't cost anything to get out and see what's available and what's possible. And so often I created AARP's Life Reimagined. I co-created their institute, which was their think and do tank on the future of aging. And we did life checkups, 75-minute live, this is pre-pandemic, life checkups in every state. And we trained, I'll call them novices, but not professional facilitators, to facilitate these 75-minute meetings. And people would come in with their arms crossed, or what's this all about? And pretty soon we'd have a full house because people say, I take my car in for a checkup. I do a physical checkup. I even do a financial checkup. I guess a life checkup at this phase of life is just common sense. What else have you got? 90% of the people who did a life checkup, even if they did it skeptically and didn't have the money or had a bad attitude about it, often it was a man dragged there by a spouse or a partner, and with their arms crossed and their baseball hat on. And they would smile and they'd say, this is fun to look at the future. And so what else have you got? And then they start to look at their own bucket list and all these different kinds of things like that. I think get real doesn't cost anything.
Great. Beverly from New Jersey says, do you have any opinion about synchronicity in the journey of realizing acting on life's purpose? I find this occurs when I appear in the life of others or they appear in my life, and there's a wonderful connection of being of service or being served at a time of need.
Amen, Beverly. I don't know what to say about that other than, yes, what you find is like people. And as the American essayist E.B. White said, I arise in the morning, torn between a desire to save the world and a desire to savor the world. This makes it hard to plan the day. In many ways, we want a life of both saving and savoring. And sometimes when we're out savoring, we meet like people that have mutual interests, and pretty soon we start doing things with them or growing together. Or saving means that they're doing something that's really interesting. I think I'll volunteer there. I think I'll do something there. And then you meet other kindred souls. And Dora, compassion is the soul of purpose. Compassion is the soul of purpose. And what we find is mutually compassionate people who are wanting to make a difference. And we find that we're more alike than we're different.
Excellent point. So Linda from South Africa says, thank you for your wisdom, Richard and Dorian, for facilitating the conversation. Appreciate you both. How do we get business to engage and prepare their older employees for this longer life?
I think that it's going to be through pain. What we find now, I see this all over the place today. I just, on my way into the city to where I'm sitting right now, I stopped at a hardware store to pick up something, and there was a big sign at the cash register, sorry for the line and the delay, but we can't find people to work here. And this is a beautiful hardware store. It's not some. And what I'm finding is that they're desperate for help. And the medical profession, I'm doing a big talk in Chicago, my first actually travel live conversation, and it's with OR, operating room it's called, and there'll be about 1,000 doctors and nurses who run the operating rooms and urgent care clinics, et cetera, all across the country. They're nurses and doctors bailing out so fast. Who's going to take care of us? There's not going to be enough nurses. And so I think, to answer the question, I don't know. But I think that older workers, so to speak, are going to be a premium. And they're going to need them and not want them to go, as opposed to wanting them to go to be replaced by younger workers. They just can't find. It depends on the industry. It depends on a lot of things. But I think we're going to find that we're valued.
Great. So Jody from Cincinnati wonders, which of your many books would you recommend for someone who just turned 64, still working in a job that I've had for nearly 20 years, not feeling at all engaged, still in need of income, and yet desperately yearning for meaning, purpose, and calling? I also don't have thousands of dollars to retrain for a new career.
Yeah, I would suggest the book Work Reimagined. Mm-hmm. And Work Reimagined, the first chapter is the end of work as we know it. And it talks about the changes that are going on, and then talks about how you can maybe reframe your current work or look at other work without quitting your day job and maybe creating a side hustle. It's a very complicated question, but all of the books that I've written have a central theme of purpose. But then they look at Life Reimagined, looks at it from a different perspective. Work Reimagined, a different perspective. So I'm not sure if that's the right book. I like this book because the one that just came out, because it's short, really conversational. It's like having a conversation and creating a conversation with others. And you can read it in 2 hours. And it's really, I think, an inspiring book. And, I'm saying it because I wrote it, but I'm hearing from people, it's a nice little 5x7, beautifully designed, hold in your hand type book that you can pass on to others and have a conversation with others about. And it's one of those kind of pass it on books. So maybe I would suggest this one and then Work Reimagined.
Mm-hmm. Great. Colin from Hawaii says, do you see the possibility that the growing numbers of boomers can be a human resource to address many of society's challenges? Encore.org has promoted this message, how do we engage more boomers, pre-retirees, and active agers to address purpose beyond oneself as primary to create positive social change?
That is a long conversation, but I'll just quote from Chip Connolly, who talks about it in this book as well, but he talks about being a mentor and an intern combined, where you're not only mentoring someone, but you're also an intern. You're learning from that someone. And I think the new reality is that the old reality of the wise sage sitting under the tree with the youngers coming for wisdom, over. What the new one is a mentor is what can I learn from this person and what can I teach this person combined. And so I think we need more mentors as we age and as we find the hunger for a new form of mentoring is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. I hear it all the time. And when I did the PBS special, whole families, after the special was on TV, I went out to 6 cities across the country and did live events. And I saw over and over whole families, grandparent, parent, kids, even grandkids, would show up saying, we're all in a what's next moment. We're all trying to figure out, we're all in transition. We're all trying to figure this out. How can you help us figure it out together? So.
Great. One last question, and then I'm going to have you do the final whatever takeaway you want. But Ellen from Brooklyn, and I think my answer, Ellen, might be read Richard's book, but she says she just finds that as she's working with retired folks that the notion of purpose can be overwhelming. Is there a user-friendly way of introducing the concept?
Big P, little p. I've already talked about it. And so Carl Jung answered the question. He said the greatest damage you could do to kids and others is your own unlived life. Mm. And so the question is, what are you doing about it yourself, and what are you modeling for others?
Great. And you've answered another question because somebody asked about the relationship with Carl Jung, so I think you've commented on that. Richard, this has been wonderful, but any final, so other questions have been, how do they get in contact with you? What kind of programs, if any, do you offer? Maybe you can respond to that, and then any final kind of takeaway that you'd like to leave with the listeners.
The takeaway is say yes to life in spite of everything. And that's from Viktor Frankl, but it's something I try to live with myself. In terms of richardleider.com, at the toolbar it says resources. And if you go into the resources, there's all kinds of giveaways that free. And I'm not going to take your email and send you or sell you anything. There's a repacking journal there that's 25 pages long, which has the Good Life inventory in it. There's all kinds of things we've talked about today in terms of tools that are all free. And that's my answer to that question. Go there and take it and use it.
Great. Thank you so much for taking your time with us. And as I said at the beginning, I totally recommend this wonderful book. It's, as Richard, you even said, too, it's simple. You can pass it on, but it's profound. And it's something to think about, puzzle out for yourself, and talk with other people about. It's really quite wonderful. So thank you very much for being back today.
Thank you so much, Dory, for having me on again anytime. I love the conversations with you, and you ask great questions, and you have great listeners. Thank you, and say yes to life.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care. Stay well and safe, everybody. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio with Dr. Dorian Mintzer. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show, listen to past episodes, or download our free retirement transition guide, visit revolutionizeyourretirementradio.com.